of it. And eventually it was determined that it was in the interests of the peace and stability of the region, et cetera. I think that we are a long way from making that decision. One of our biggest concerns is Libya descending into chaos and becoming a giant Somalia. It's right now not something that we see in the offing, but many of the al-Qaeda activists in Afghanistan and later in Iraq came from Libya.
Joins us from outside the White House. Is the administration now speaking with one voice on the issue of intervention? Yesterday, it certainly seemed there was a difference in tone.
There did seem to be a difference in tone yesterday, and I think they've tightened their act a little bit today. There certainly has been a change in emphasis and tone compared to the weekend and the early part of the week. And let me play, as an example, this clip from the U.S. Defense Secretary Robert Gates, who was giving testimony on Wednesday on Capitol Hill. And I think it serves to illustrate not only the change in tone and emphasis in the past couple of days, but also the different approach to foreign intervention between the Obama administration and the Bush administration. And remember, Secretary of Defense Robert Gates was the defense secretary for both the Bush administration and the present Obama administration. And he does not pull any punches nor mince his words when it comes to explaining how difficult it will be to set up a no-fly zone over Libya, both logistically and politically. Here's more of how he put it.
There's a lot of, frankly, loose talk about some of these military options, and let's just call a spade a spade. A no-fly zone begins with an attack on Libya to destroy the air defenses. That's the way you do a no-fly zone. And then you can fly planes around the country and not worry about our guys being shot down. But that's the way it starts.
I'm not endorsing it.
And it requires, no, I understand, but it also requires more airplanes than you would find on a single aircraft carrier. So it is a big operation in a big country.
John, I suppose one way to know what the administration really feels, if it is indeed unified, is if the president spoke. Is there any chance about that on no-fly zones?
Well, it's very interesting that you should mention that, because we did not hear today from President Obama, at least not on the issue of Libya. The decision was taken early in the morning here to leave those comments, and pretty meager they were too, I might say, to the spokesperson of the White House, Jay Carney. But we saw President Obama very briefly in the briefing room when he came out to condemn the attacks on American military personnel in Germany today. And at that briefing, the issue of Libya, I think this is very important for our viewers to understand, was third on the agenda. It came after President Obama spoke about the shootings in Germany and after Jay Carney had introduced talk about the budget. A spokesperson came out to explain how they're selling off some government buildings. So the budget really dominated here, not Libya. And now, however, the president, when he was making those remarks, said that on Thursday he would be meeting with the Mexican president, Felipe Calderon, and then in the Oval Office he will answer some questions. Presumably one of them at least will then be about the situation in Libya. Shihab?
John Terrett reporting. Thanks, John. Earlier I spoke to Bruce Riedel. He's been a senior advisor to 3 U.S. presidents on the Middle East, and he's worked closely with the Obama administration on Afghanistan and Pakistan. He gave us his thoughts on how the U.S. government should deal with events in Libya.
I think the administration is wise to focus on sanctions, wise to make it clear that the Gaddafi regime and the Gaddafi family is going to pay a heavy price for what it's doing. But I think it's also wise to recognize the best thing about the winter of Arab discontent and Arab dignity is it's not about America. Don't put America into the middle of this. Leave this for Arabs to decide, not make it an Arab-American confrontation. That's what Gaddafi would love. That's what al-Qaeda would love. Leave this for Arabs to determine their outcome, their future.
Having said that, though, it's a strategically important region. Can the U.S. government ever simply say, you guys get on with it? Surely there are meetings underway to see how best to position the U.S. in any aftermath, in whatever circumstance the aftermath might be, to make sure the U.S. strategic interests are well served.
Sure, we're going to be big players in the post-revolution game in Egypt, probably in Libya, in Tunisia, everywhere. American military assistance, American economic assistance, trade with America. All of that's vital to these new countries. But let's not put the American military back in the picture. We've got 2 wars in the Middle East right now. One thing we should have learned in the last decade, it's really easy to get in and really, really hard to get out. So let's not jump out of enthusiasm for trying to help something we don't really understand into military options that aren't necessary.
And these lessons would seem to be clear. And so what do you think drives the various neocons who've come out of the woodwork recently, and even Hillary Clinton initially, it seemed, when they seem to be, well, and we know the neocons are, talking forcefully about muscular U.S. military intervention? What's driving them?
I think neocons just like to flex muscles, and I think, frankly, they haven't learned very much from their own mistakes of the last several years. I mean, we're hearing the same kind of stale old language about no-fly zones, about the specter of chemical weapons and all of this kind of stuff. What is remarkable and new about 2011 is the Arab people rose up in revolutions against their autocrats. The United States ought to be on the side of history, but we ought to let the Arab people determine their own future now.
Rhys Rydell. So the possibility of a no-fly zone in Libya for the moment has been played down by US and other international leaders. So what else can be done? To help us answer that question, we're joined by Henry Schuler. He's a retired US diplomat who once served in Benghazi, the town in eastern Libya now in control of anti-government protesters. Actually, do you think part of the strategy is to continue talking about no-fly zones to keep the pressure on, even if there's no intention perhaps of implementing one?
Well, that may very well be the case, but it is a difficult challenge. If we only had to establish a no-fly zone over eastern Libya, which has been liberated on the ground, we don't need to worry about surface-to-air missile defense. But if we're going to deploy over, establish a no-fly zone over the western cities, that's a very different situation, and I'm certainly not going to challenge the Secretary of Defense in that regard. I haven't deployed with the aircraft carrying the 6th Fleet since 1958.
But you do think the U.S. can supply some assistance?
Oh yes, there's no doubt whatsoever that we can apply, and I think probably the first thing, most important thing, would be to disrupt the command and communication system of control of the Gaddafi forces, and perhaps shut down the propaganda machine at the same time. And I spoke to a former U.S. Secretary of Defense as recently as yesterday, who confirmed that that is no difficult task.
But do you think there's such suspicion of U.S. motivation that even such covert activity will be almost seen as even worse, and an even more underhand manner that the U.S. will be trying to get hold of Libya's oil? I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? There's such suspicion of the U.S. in the region and elsewhere.
Well, I think as long as we avoid boots on the ground, that's much diminished. It is a concern that's what is driving us. It's not. I think it's a very sincere effort to support the brave Libyan effort to overthrow Gaddafi.
I mean, along with your diplomatic duties, you were actually also in charge of an oil company just before Gaddafi took over.
I was in Tripoli at the time he seized power.
How do you think the oil companies are looking at this? What are they thinking about, and what are they saying to the U.S. government about their interests?
Well, I think they probably are finally